Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how calmly I can tell you the whole story.
It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it had haunted me day and night. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. Every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient, I put in a dark lantern, and then my head. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Death, in approaching the old man, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and it was the mournful influence of this unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, I opened a very, very little crevice in the lantern, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there. There was no pulsation. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. When I had made an end of these labors, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I had now to fear. There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I led them at length to his chamber. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease, but ere long my head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. Still they sat, and still they chatted. The ringing became more distinct, until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? The noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. Anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here,